All right, well, I think we will get started. Hi everyone, I'm Molly McGowan. Thank you so much for attending our program today. I'm the archivist at the PEC Archives while Krista Richardson is away on maternity leave. So today I'll be asking Braden and Liz some questions about how to obtain a historic designation. And if you have any questions, there's going to be a Q&A session at the end. So I would ask that you type your questions into the chat. You can see the icon for chat. It should be at the bottom of your screen. So I just type your questions in there and then I'll ask them at the end. And while the Q&A is going on, please feel free to add more questions. So I'll let Braden and Liz introduce themselves, and Liz is going to tell us a bit about the Prince Edward County Heritage Advisory Committee.
Do you want to start, Braden?
I was going to say, you go ahead, Liz.
Oh, okay. So my name is Liz Driver, and I'm calling in from Royal Road, an 1860 farmhouse. I've been on PHAC. This is my second term, and it's a 4-year term. PHAC stands for, if anyone wonders, the Prince Edward Heritage Advisory Committee. And it's a statutory committee under the Ontario Heritage Act. The purpose is to advise council on heritage matters. PHAC doesn't have any decision-making powers whatsoever, but we bring our expertise together and we advise on a number of different matters. And shall I just sort of briefly mention those to set the stage, Molly?
Sure.
Okay, so one very important thing that we do is we work to identify, describe, and make recommendations to council about designating historic properties in Prince Edward County. And then for those properties that do end up being designated, if someone wants to alter their property, they need to get a building permit or something like that, then the committee gives its advice on that application, with the main purpose being that any alterations or work that a owner wants to do is not going to harm the heritage of the property. And I should say, although today we're going to be talking about 94 Walmsley Road, which is an absolutely outstanding heritage property, it also covers properties in the Picton Heritage Conservation District and any other district that might be decided in the county. So this is how we meet once a month and we give our advice to staff and council. I'll just say a short thing about myself. I actually first really came to love heritage buildings when I went to do my undergraduate degree in Kingston at Queen's, and I just couldn't believe, like, living in amongst all these beautiful limestone buildings. And here I am in the county now, which I absolutely love. I did a master's degree in architectural history in London, and my scholarly expertise is actually in the history of cookbooks. So I'm a food historian, and I currently work as a curator at Campbell House Museum in Toronto. So there's the basics.
Perfect. My name is Braden Scully. I am the owner, along with my wife Dawn Eyre, of the Eyre Scully Walmsley Farm Complex, as we are officially known under the heritage here in the county. We have owned the house now for just about 7 years, and we've been here coming up on a year and a half, almost 2 years full-time living here in the county. We received our designation last summer after what I would say was about a 6-month kind of process of surveys and going through, looking at the house, and Liz putting together an incredible package of material around the house. And my wife and I have been interested in architecture and old houses and Victorians for as long as we can remember. And we were looking for a place here in the county. We drove up the driveway and instantly fell in love. So once we learned even more about the history of the house and the family, the Walmsley family, that lived here continuously for over almost 100, well, actually almost 150 or 60 years. So the Walmsleys were on the property in the 1830s. This house was built in approximately 1875. And they had the house in the family directly until the late 1980s. So we are only the third owners of the property, aside from including the family, since the property has been built here from 1875 and from originally homesteaded in 1830. So we're very cognizant, I guess, of the history that comes with that, and have had the opportunity to meet and to grow to know a lot of the family who's still here in the county, and count them now as good friends. And so it's been kind of a great process of learning about both the history of the family and the history of the property, and being able to kind of preserve that for a longer generation as well. So
it's fantastic. So I'm going to start asking some questions now. And at the beginning, while I'm asking the questions, I'm just going to share a brief slideshow that shows some different pictures that Braden sent me of the property, and also a couple of the pictures that we had in the archives. So just give me a moment to do that. All right, that should be good to go. Okay, so to start off with, I guess this might be a bit more directed to Braden. Why were you interested in learning about the history of your property?
I think it's just kind of fascinating, especially with, knowing that we were only the third, the third family to own the property. Is really kind of connects you, I think, more directly perhaps to the past than something that had changed hands a number of times over the years. And as you can see from the pictures, it really retains all of its original features and look, with the Carpenter Gothic style of the building, all of the crenellations and the little, the full lightning rod system from the 1800s is still in place. The siding on the house is still the original siding. You can actually see the cut nails that are holding the boards into the framing through the paint. It needed a significant paint job when we acquired it, so we set about kind of trying to find historic colors and historic patterns that could have been used on the house in the past. You'll see an older shot here of the house, and I think it was always kind of a darker gray color with dark gray or dark brown trim, which would have been very Victorian at the time. We decided to go for a little bit of a brighter palette and choose kind of the yellows and the gray edges and some little color highlights and detail. Certainly not trying to turn it into a San Francisco style painted lady, but trying to bring it a little bit more of the contrast to some of the detail in the house. You can see here, the family on the front porch. We actually recently redid that front step and used some of these historical photographs to make it very much what it was in terms of how they had it looking from the original piece as well. There were some changes over the years, and as you can see from this photo coming up next, at one point the family in need of a little bit more space actually closed in one of the front porches and added it into the main space of the house. I think they used that part as a kitchen at that time. The owners before us had restored it back to the symmetrical view. And that's actually one of the really interesting things about the house is its symmetricality. And unusually, this house was actually built by a father and son and built as a double family house. So the father and mother lived in one side of the house, and on the mirror image of the other side of the house, the son, his wife, and their children lived. And it was multi-generational for a number of decades from its original build in the 1870s up until the 1830s. Then Dr. Walmsley took possession, ownership of the house. Dr. Walmsley was the town doctor in Picton for several decades. I think if you talk to people here in town, their parents, grandparents were all delivered by Dr. Walmsley. So he's well known as a figure in the community. And being a prosperous doctor and well-to-do after the war, they kept this property as a summer place. They kept the south end of the house as it was a double house. They kept the south end of the house as the family part, and they would come out and use it as a cottage in the summers. And they had a grass tennis court in the back lawn, and the other half of the house was tenant farmers who maintained it as a farm and farmed it continuously through that period. And so they would come out in the summer and on weekends to the house and stay here in the summers. Then Tom Walmsley, who was the last Walmsley to occupy the house, he and his wife Geraldine. Tom, I get a little misty. Tom unfortunately passed away last year. Sorry, I didn't.
Heritage is what's important to you.
So anyway, we got to know. Gather myself for just a sec. So we got to know Tom quite well. Super guy, and they took it over back in the 70s as a family farm again, and took back and again lived just on the north side of the house. The south side was kept for the rest of the family to use as a cottage and a spot. And he farmed it directly for about 15 or 20 years as a dairy operation. Raised his family here before they made the difficult decision to sell it on to new owners in the late 80s, which was Dick Potter and Ann Potter. And they set about doing a fairly significant, I won't say renovation, but really restoration of the house, retaining 99% of the original features that remained. The entire exterior is basically the exact same as it was. Some doors have been moved in the back portion of the house. There were two summer kitchens symmetrically flanking the opposite back side of the house, and they added a back entrance in the middle. So the house now from the air looks a bit like an E, and that center entrance, that center part of the E, is new construction. But aside from that, the rest of the house retains its shape, its form. One bay window was added to the south side to really take in the view of the farm and became the new kitchen. And the house was turned from a double family house into a single family house with basically the one central wall that was between the two removed. And most of the rooms upstairs on the south end of the house retain the same shape and format. We have a couple of the original stair rails are in place. A lot of the interior, unfortunately, was in difficult repair, and so was changed and reconfigured a little bit. So it is all drywall and not lath and plaster. All the electrical was updated and changed. But the real, value and heritage to this house is that exterior facade and some of those interior portions as well. With its triple gabled feature, it is really one of, I think, only a couple, and Liz can correct me, but 2 or 3 triple gabled houses in the county. This is, I think, the largest of the triple gables with the symmetrical porches in between. And we're quite lucky to be able to live here and call it home.
Well, it's one of only 3 triple gabled houses in the county. It's the only triple gable that's wood framed, although it sits on a limestone foundation. And it's the grandest of them. And I think that what really struck me when I visited, I would say actually that a lot of the interior survives the feeling and the divisions. Yeah. Because I've been in some heritage houses in the county, and they look original on the outside, and you go in, and this is often the case that people move things around inside. But when you enter Braden and Dawn's house, you go in the center door, the whole layout is still there, the wonderful staircase. And what I love is at each end of these 2 separate family homes are a little enclosed back stair. So everybody could come in the front. But once you went into your private home in either wing, you could nip up and down the stairs internally without, you know, completely self-sufficient without anybody else knowing. It's like a secret back stair.
Yeah, it's kind of pretentious, but we have 3 staircases.
And another wonderful thing that I loved was when I went down into the cellar with Braden, and he showed me how so the kitchen extensions, or the summer kitchens, are at the back of each of the separate houses. Anyway, there's a separate cistern for water under each house, which makes sense, but it's just such an incredible thing to find 2 cisterns in a house. I love getting into the guts of a house like that.
Yeah, the cisterns are cool. They're still there, and you know, it's the same limestone as the foundation, but they've all been parged on the interiors to make them, you know, watertight containers for water. And if you see some of the older pictures of the house, and I don't know if you can pull up maybe a couple of the older spots, but you can actually see where the eaves troughing runs off the gables at the front, across the front of the house, and then around the corners to the side. And then they went down into those cisterns at each end of the house. And they got their water directly from the cisterns. And under the 2 back staircases that Liz was just talking about, there was a hand pump that went down into those cisterns, and they would pump the water directly up for household use from those 2 cisterns from the rainwater. And you can see, yeah, you can see a little bit in that shot. It's a little bit of a small picture, but there are eaves troughs running right under the window line on both sides there, from the inside of the gable across the top of the bay window. And those eaves troughs ran around the corner to the side of the house and into the cistern. So, you know, they really got it, you know, systemized as these settler farmers to harvest that rainwater and be able to use that. As everyone knows here in the county, wells are difficult, and that rainwater would have been a significant use here in the household. In fact, to the point where under one side of the house, a 3rd cistern was added later on to provide even more water for the house as well. So the cisterns were really important.
This is an important photograph, and it just shows why if you're looking to designate your house or doing historical research, you want to find these archival photos because you can see what's missing or how things are changed. So the 2 chimneys are about the only things that are missing on this house. All of the trim is quite extraordinary, that pretty much everything else, and the shutters are also all the original shutters still existing. And if anybody has ever tried to maintain shutters, you know, scraping and painting on a, you know, routine basis to make sure the wood is in good condition, it is a miracle. Like, all you can say is that the Walmsley family loved their house, and they took terrific care of it. The other thing about that photo, Braden, and maybe you can speak about it, is that the gate posts, and so it's very hard often to find traces of earlier landscaping, and that photograph helps you set out understand the layout.
Yeah, that fence, I think, was an important part of the house, and it really delineated the yard as a working farm as well. There's an aerial photo in that slideshow too that was taken, I think, in the 60s, but it shows, oh, there's a great side-by-side to show how it really has maintained. I'll talk about the shutters a little bit. Yeah, the shutters, all original to the house. They're all hand-pinned wood dowel shutters. They were not, they were a bit of a labor to get those restored back to working condition. They had been kind of attached to the house, I think, when they did the last reno. We restored them. The original hardware was all still on them, but they've been fastened securely back to the house. So we actually took all the hardware off, had the hardware restored and clear sealed, and then reapplied. So all the shutters actually shut. And the one thing we did add that wasn't on the house originally were shutter brackets to hold them, shutter dogs, that's what we call them, to hold them back against the walls of the house, which you don't see in the pictures of the old house. but just add a little practicality since we made them functional, and we tried to choose kind of a period look for it. You can also see in this picture where we did redo in the new construction the front steps. They're very similar to the very simple front steps that were in place in the older house. In the aerial photo, and you can see this fence and the ornateness of the wrought iron with the wood didn't survive, and it became more of a white picket fence later in the 40s, 50s, 60s era. But if you can zoom in on that, you can actually see how, as a working farm, that fence really served to keep animals and cattle out of the house. And you can see that white picket fence in this shot wrapping squarely around the front of the house and onto the front lane. Because the field in front of the house now, which is not worked directly in front of the house, used to come right up to this other side of the lane, and they worked that land right to the front door. So it was, you know, really a demarcation of the farm world and the household world for the building as well.
I would love to comment on this aerial view. Now, I think the important thing to remember about designations is it's the whole property. Whole properties are designated. Sometimes it is only the house which has value. In the case of this property, the house, the drive shed, which you can see there just to the left in red, and the big barn are the three buildings which the value of them is captured. The heritage attributes of those three buildings are captured for the design and artistic value, the craftsmanship. But another aspect of the value is the contextual value. And that means how do the buildings sit in the landscape? How does the property relate to other properties around it? And what is what's wonderful about this view is it shows you the structure of a farm. And so you've got the drive lane, first of all, lower right, you can see there's that you enter from Walmsley Road, you come down this tree-lined driveway. When you emerge from the tree-lined driveway, you look ahead down the farm lane, and the view is actually protected. The view is protected in the designation bylaw, because when you look out on that view, you don't see any hydro lines, you don't see any evidence of the 20th and 21st centuries. You just see the original agricultural view. And it's interesting because, first of all, the land drops down. There's a little dip, and I believe it's the headwaters of the Black River there. And yes. Then it rises up. So it's an absolutely beautiful view. And the other interesting thing about the house is, you know, a lot of county houses are close to the road. They face the road. This one was very deliberately set back from the road, and it faces westwards. So there's a lot of very like unique qualities about the property, but at the same time, the property embodies, you know, the basic agricultural structure of the land.
Absolutely, and that farm road, that vista just continues straight back up, and all of the land around the farm is still farm. We only own about 20 acres of the front portion of what would have been the original 250-acre Victorian farm. The tree line actually that you can see in this picture, that little bit of trees in the top right, is the boundary line of the original property that the one off of this picture, but not too far off of this picture, and then all the way from Walmsley Road to Royal Street, which is now called Royal Road, but all the Walmsleys refer to it as Royal Street, behind the farm. So it was a significant size farm. It was expanded by the Walmsleys. They actually ended up owning to the right of that tree line and the property next door, the farm next door, all the way back to Royal as well, and then some additional property on the other side of Walmsley Road at one point. So we have about a 5-acre field in the front that belongs to us that we still farm. It is oats and barley in the field this year for cattle feed, and done on a rotational basis as well by the Guernseys, who do a wonderful job. And they also farm all of the contiguous land that was the original Walmsley farm to this day as well. So it still operates very much as a farm without the dairy operation.
No,
very much still in use from an historic farm perspective, which I think is important.
Do you know, I should say we don't have very many barns that are designated in the county, and yet they're such an important part of our built heritage. So it's absolutely wonderful that the barn is part of the designation, Braden. And, you know, that's part of the process, is that talking to the owner and making sure that that everybody's sort of on board about what are the most important parts of the property, and making sure that they're captured in the designation.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, and you know, we're very lucky. Everything is in really good condition. You know, the Walmsleys took incredible care of the property, the house, the outbuildings, the barn. You know, a couple of the smaller buildings, the old chicken coop and what was a piggery, are in, you know, fairly dilapidated condition, just not having been used for a long time. But the barn itself is in remarkable condition. It, when converted to a dairy operation in the 70s, was required to be brought up to a more current standard. So they actually took the whole barn up off the ground, lifted it in the air, and poured a giant concrete foundation under the entire barn to support the existing original structure. So, you know, it's really been preserved from a foundational perspective for a long time, because I think there's 3 feet thick of concrete underneath that entire barn. And the barn itself, and it's difficult to see from this aerial photo, but the barn itself actually sits right on limestone in that corner of the building. So it's not going anywhere. It's not sinking into the ground, and the roof is my one thing I got to make sure we keep not leaking. But the frame inside is in fantastic condition, and all the beams, which are, you know, in many cases 2 foot square, are all hand squared by axes back in what we think is the 1850s, when the barn was built before the house. And it was expanded, I think, based on some architectural exploration, and thanks to Liz and Edwin for doing some of that work. You can see where the barn was added to, and that tied into a story that we heard from the Walmsleys, where Dr. Walmsley remembers being a child growing up, and he was ill as a child, couldn't do a lot, but he remembers the barn being, quote, built. And that actual timing of early 1900s times into when we think that barn was added to, and basically almost doubled in size from a scale perspective, as farming operations had evolved and they needed more space in the barn. So it really is a neat piece, and with that change over time, you can really see how, you know, buildings were adapted and reused to expand for the operation, and it really is a bit of a gem.
I should say, oh, sorry, Molly.
Oh, no, I was just thinking maybe you should touch on the next question. You guys are so passionate. We gotta keep things going along.
Sure.
So how did you actually go about obtaining the historic designation?
So yeah, great question. So we had an interest in history and in the farm, and we had found and already established great relationships with the Walmsleys, and we started just kind of thinking about it, not, you know, in any formal way. And then we happened to meet Liz and find out more about the process here in the county, and you know, make the decision to go forward and have a designation. And there are some aspects to that I think people do need to ensure that they understand. You know, and I'll talk maybe more specifically about that in a minute, but really then once kind of bringing Liz into the picture and letting her know that we were interested in getting it designated, she was very excited to come and take a look and you know, document what we have and what's here. You know, we obviously already had a fair number of these historical photos and documents and pieces, as well as things that are available from the archives, obviously, too. And this house, you know, is in the settler's dream, you know, so it was we got a copy of The Settler's Dream from the real estate agent, as a housewarming gift. So it was clearly an important house and something that had already had a lot of history and documentation, and we thought it was important to, continue that and to have that preserved for future generations as well.
And Liz, could you touch on what the steps the PHAC follows when it comes to obtaining a historic designation?
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, owners can approach members of PHAC. So PHAC has a designation subcommittee, and so the owner can approach us, as Braden did, or a citizen, a group of people. Anyone can approach PHAC or council or the planning department and say, I think this property should be designated. Then a member of PHAC liaises with the owner, does various kinds of research, whatever information the owner has, whatever, and perhaps they've got information from previous owners. Always a trip to the archives, that is critical. And I'll say that the Haspy files are always a starting point, plus The Settler's Dream. And then through that process, we write up a description of the property and derive from that what are called the heritage attributes. So what attributes of the property should be put into a bylaw to be protected in perpetuity. So, and then having written up this sort of, we can call it the draft bylaw, and sharing it with the owner to make sure we're all on, on the same page, we then take the recommendation to council, and council decides whether they would like to have a bylaw to protect the property. The notice goes into the newspaper for 30 days, and if there's no objections, then it becomes a bylaw. The whole, what we're looking for and governed by as members of PHAC is what's called Regulation 906 under the Ontario Heritage Act, and that is what specifies 3 categories of value, only one of which needs to be satisfied in order to designate, and they are design or physical value, like craftsmanship, for example, and the Walmsley property has it in spades. Historical association, it could simply be a building where an important person lived or was born. Again, the history, the early long history of the Walmsley property with the Walmsley family, and it satisfies that. And then contextual value, which, as I was describing about the farm and how things relate. And if you want to think of contextual value, think of how cross people were when the brick church was torn down at the end of Picton Main Street. That galvanized people to realize, like, things can disappear. Things can disappear overnight if we don't take steps to protect them. So that is essentially the process to get the bylaw. And that means that Braden and Dawn have a responsibility for looking after those heritage attributes. And this is a good segue. Like, why would anyone want to designate the property? One is one is pride. I mean, we had our property designated too. I'm sitting in a designated property right now. Pride, like to have the heritage value recognized. But the other is because after you, and you can think like, when I can't live in this property anymore, when I have to sell it, or even if I gave it to my kids, like, I want to be sure, if I care about this place, that certain things are protected and not lost. And Ontario has had the Ontario Heritage Act since 1975. It was updated in 2005. We don't have the most stringent regulations or laws in the Western world, but they are still very, very important for protecting what we have. And so PHAC, of course, is very, it's wonderful to know that we have council support. And oh, I forgot about one thing that PHAC does, which is new, which is PHAC administers and recommends to council people who have properties who would like a heritage grant. So, council is now standing behind protection by offering grants to people who take on the responsibility of a heritage designation.
Fantastic.
So maybe I'll put my property owner's hat on and maybe kind of thinking about it from that perspective. So there are a couple of things that I think you need to think about if you're going to get your house heritage designated. The first is insurance. Insurance is not as easily attainable for a heritage property as for a normal property. And I think that's primarily a function of the insurance companies over panicking about what things might cost if it's a heritage house versus if it's not a heritage house. And 99% of that, frankly, is erroneous. But there is a perception with the insurance companies, and therefore it is a little more difficult to find insurance. Having said that, it wasn't that difficult. So we did have to change insurance companies here in Picton from one insurance provider to another, who was able to easily source this insurance. And it was at a slight premium to what we were paying before, but not really a significant amount. It was 8%, I think, more. Not a tremendous amount more than you might have just gotten a different quote from a different insurer anyway. The overall, concern, I think, is people watch a lot of television from the UK, and we don't have the same structure as they do in the UK in terms of, grade 2 listed properties where, you buy the house, and because it's grade 2 heritage listed, even though there's no floor remaining in the house, it must be redone with oak staves, down from the River Thames. I mean, we don't go to that kind of constraint here in Ontario by any means. Frankly, if the house was to have half burned down before it was a heritage home, they have to make it look right from the street regardless of whether, they're not going to put square vinyl windows in one half, and be able to do that. And now it's a heritage home, so they have to do it another way. That wasn't the case anyway, even despite that there's an insurance belief, perhaps, that there is. For this being a wood framed house, frankly, any carpenter can work on this house. There's nothing esoteric or strange about building this house. It is, time honored practice of building. You might have to have some, the exterior boards, as I've discovered, are not a standardized size. So if I did need to replace some boards on the side of the house, I would have to have something custom milled to match. But frankly, you do that anyway because it would look really silly if some of the boards were 8 inches wide and some of the boards were 5. And it's not actually a significant premium if you were having an amount of siding redone to have it milled in a different size. It's actually like 20 cents extra a foot. It's versus $1.20, it's like $1.40. So there's not a huge expense in there that I think people overthink about in terms of what you do for renovation. Thirdly, I think it really depends on the condition of your house. From a homeowner perspective, in looking at the heritage designation for this house, frankly, the house is in phenomenal condition. So it's not like something where, a new owner is going to come in and go, oh my God, we've got to redo everything and it's heritage designated, so that's going to be a huge problem that I've got to work through, because it's not the case. So I think it will depend in different people's minds just where they are with their house and what they, what needs to be done, what could be done, and what the concerns would be for a future homeowner. Because there are some people that would not look perhaps at a designated home on the basis of concerns of things they might not be able to do. And I think, and maybe Liz can speak to this, but given what we've got designated here at the house, anything that we would want to do would frankly be allowed. Even if I were to want to take the 1-story bump out on the back that was an add-on to the house in the 80s and turn that into a 2-story bump out, but make it a gable on the one end and extend it out of the house and have it match the siding, I am almost certain, 99.9%, that PHAC would be like absolutely fine with that. given proper architectural plans drawn up, and shown what was going to be done. You know, and that's, so, you know, you could do all sorts of things with regard to the house, both exterior and interior. I think it's just something people need to be cognizant of, and then and take into consideration in their thinking. But, you know, we are constrained really only in screwing the house up. You know, I can't come in and say, I hate these 3 gables, I want to rip those off the front and put in a glass pavilion, you know, but who would do that anyway? So it becomes one of those kind of questions of, yes, we're a little constrained on that, but no one would frankly do that who's interested in you know, beautiful Victorian houses anyway. So
I would love to comment on what the topic that you've raised, because so for example, you mentioned that you need to get a building permit to put your pool in. So a consideration will be, when it comes to PHAC, well, are they going to put it right in front of the, you know, the front of the house or something? No, like Braden has already thought about it, because I've seen the plans. You know, they're going to very discreetly work it into the back, at the back of the house, where it's
actually going to go where the tennis court once was for the Walmsley.
Oh, perfect, right. Sports continues on Walmsley Road. And so for PHAC welcomes interesting additions and changes to heritage homes, because, you know, they have to, these buildings have to continue to be livable. Recently, someone who had a heritage home in Picton put an absolutely amazing modern addition onto a limestone house. Sometimes the contrast works really well with the heritage fabric. People have, you know, had to, say, tear down some small aspect so that they could add an amenity that they needed for the contemporary living. And these things are all well understood, and they're encouraged, because you know, you want people to be thinking thoughtfully, but keeping the buildings up to date, so that people continue to want to live in them. Because the worst thing is what is called demolition by neglect. And it's people who just sit in their heritage home and they let it fall apart around them. What we want is pride and it's called stewardship. You know, being a steward of your home.
Yeah. Like we're going to have Cat 6 Ethernet run through the entire house from a interlinked temple. So, you know, we're keeping up with the modern Victorian era here at Walmsley. So.
It's great to know that you can make those kind of changes, because I think that's a concern a lot of people have, is if they get it historically designated that they won't be allowed to do anything. So
it's why I wanted to raise it, because Liz and I have had this conversation in the past, and it is a huge concern of a lot of homeowners, and I think wrongly so. And so for those who are considering getting their house designated, I think it's important to know. But it is also still important for those concerned to get it designated to know that there will be buyers who won't understand that, and it may have a potential impact on the number of people who might look at your house from an ongoing standpoint, rightly or wrongly. But it is something that is important for people to consider, because there is, you know, significant investment in properties that's taking place.
I have a question for Braden. Braden, did you, like, in the process of designation, did you gain new insights into your property? I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely, we did. You know, it really just caused you to kind of go through the nitty gritty a little bit. And also it brought, you know, in this case with Liz and Edwin, who, for those of you who don't know, Edwin, Liz's partner, is, you know, a preeminent architect and just received a Lifetime Achievement Award, I believe. So, you know, having those kind of people come in and provide perspective on your property that, you know, you've seen, but you didn't really look at it that way. The barn being a prime example. You know, it's obvious and was extended back, but it was just there. Now, having looked at it and then gone into the barn and looked at how they changed the framing to match with, all of a sudden it's like a whole, you know, if you're interested in old buildings, you're interested in architecture and construction, it was a fascinating process, and definitely learned a lot of stuff.
Nice. All right,
I see a question on the side screen in the chat from Heather.
Let's wait. Let's hold off on the questions till the end.
Okay.
I think that might be the best way of doing it. So could we talk a little bit about how you guys used the archives when it came to researching the property?
I'll start and then I'll turn it to Liz because mine was a little less. I'm really lucky in that we had met the Walmsleys. Elizabeth Robb, Nee Walmsley, is the keeper of the Walmsley family archives, and they have so many great pictures and documentation and things, and we've been able to sit down across from them across the table and with Tom Walmsley and Geraldine and really kind of get so many things that we wanted to know about the house directly from the family, which I know is a unusual circumstance. But then Liz was able to kind of go from there with things we were able to provide via the family, and then use the archive. So I'll turn it maybe to Liz.
Well, I would say this was a bit of an unusual designation in that respect, that so much information came from the family. So that when I went to the archives, it was like the archives were confirming information that had come from the site visit and the family. It's interesting, the Haspi record for this property, it doesn't go a lot into the detail about the house, you know, the finials and that architectural detail. It was probably more than the poor person doing the work in 1979 to 81 could handle, because they were doing a lot of properties at one time. But it was useful because it noted the alteration. It noted the closed-in porch. This is, and if you go, so here you see they were looking for the architectural data. Look, all it says is 3 gables front, finials, bay windows, umbrage with veranda posts, dormers. That is not a lot, but it does. I think the people who did these documents were so observant and very, very careful. They noted that the one veranda is enclosed. That was the one alteration. Now, interesting, they have comparison with other structures, so that gives you a clue where to go and look to see comparable buildings. And then under, they've got subsequent owners. So again, there was so much more family history available. But what I love, and if we can go to the next page where it has the little sketches, of course, you're always, if you go to the Haspi files for your property, they obviously were not just doing heritage. They were doing many more, many properties are in these files. That's all I'm going to say.
The entries were actually used to write Settlers Dream.
Ah, okay. But not all of them got into the Settlers Dream.
That is very true.
So there's more than in the Settlers Dream. This is an incredible diagram showing you the structure of the property, where the buildings were, the angles from which the photos were taken. And then they have these 3 little maps. So 1863 here on the right-hand side, that's from the Tremaine map, showing what buildings you could see on the Tremaine map for the property. The next one, 1878, the middle one, is from the Belden's Atlas, and it shows that there was a church across the road. And then 1982, the layout. So just imagine, here we are in 2020, a lot of structures have disappeared since the Haspi files and since the Settlers Dream. So potentially anybody going to look for their property in the Haspi files could find out a lot more information.
Now, I will just warn people that the amount contained in the Haspi files can vary greatly from home to home. So this is actually quite a complete entry. A lot of the entries do not contain this much information, so it can vary quite a lot. The Haspi files also include some photographs. There's a lot of photographs of this property. Sometimes it's 1, sometimes it's 2. So I just wanted to give everyone a heads up that there can be some variation on content.
So I find that the Haspi files are nevertheless the most informative or most useful. But the land registry documents, I find these very difficult to read. I need an archivist to help look at these. I think that the Walmsley one in a way is one of the clearer ones, but sometimes when you get subdivided properties into multiple lots with multiple owners over, 200 years, oh my gosh, you have to go back and forth between volumes. Molly,
Well, yes,
experience.
There can be, because the land abstracts can mention multiple lots, and lots were split. So a lot of times if you look at your property tax form, it'll say part lot. And we don't have information on lots in the land abstract. It's the whole lot. And I will fully admit I am not an expert on property law, so I can try my best to help people read these. What I advise is that people come and make an appointment with me. Right now appointments have to wait until we reopen, but you can also email me, and then we kind of go over what the different fields mean and sort of go from there, because they can be quite complex.
Okay. I was really fascinated getting this stuff from you, Molly, and taking a look and seeing all of the changes from the one family to the other, and kind of comparing that to the stories that we've been told and how it all moved, and then where the different liens were and who'd released. I mean, it was just kind of fascinating stuff.
Yeah, you could look at these for hours, and they also have instruments tied to them, which we have many in the archives, not all of them. And so basically the land abstract is sort of like, this happened, but then you go to the instruments to find out, I guess, more of the meat of what happened. So you can get lost in them.
Even like the $16 to the Hydroelectric Power Commission, like that makes it into the file is hilarious to me.
Yeah, anything that happened on the land. And I should also mention our records go up until about the 60s. If you're looking for more modern records, you'd have to go to the land registry office in Picton. So you can also find more modern information on your house, just not through us or property.
But I guess $16 was probably a lot of money in 1939. So
yes, yeah. Liz, did you have anything else to say on did you use any of the instruments?
I looked at them and I just confirmed what we knew, and that was great.
Right, yes, and that can be very, very helpful.
But I will say, for other properties, it has been the only source of information where, maybe there's been multiple changes of owners, there's not the same connection to the original family, and then the archives is your only source of information.
That's true, and your ability to have a relationship with the family and to see their pictures is really phenomenal, because we only have limited material in the archives. So a lot of people come in and they expect that we're going to have really old photos of their property, or be able to tell them very specific information about their house, and that's not always the case. The photos in the Haspi file, which actually stands for Historical Architectural Survey of Prince Edward County, should that for?
Yeah, I was going to ask exactly what that stood for, because I was like,
yeah, we use the acronym a lot, and I'm not sure I explain it all the time. Those photos are from the 1980s, and so there is sort of a limit to the information we have. So if you can make those other connections, it's really helpful.
Molly, just as a side, because I'm interested, I provided you with a bunch of photos for this house and more modern and some historical things. Would any of that be stuff that you would then add back to the record? Like, is there a way for it to work both ways?
Yeah, that's definitely something I would consider talking to you about admitting into the archives, because I think the property's been historically designated now, and it's important to try and track that changes over time. And the archive started as a volunteer-run organization, and so we really only kind of have what people have given us. So we're always looking to collect more information that's relevant to the history of the county, and that would definitely include photographs of, historically relevant buildings.
Okay, that's great. That's interesting.
Yep.
And I think it's going to be fabulous when the HASP files are digitized. And
yes, we are very slowly working on that.
Oh, go faster.
There's only 2 of us, so it takes time. But it is something we are that we are working on.
And I would actually, like at the time, whenever you are able to launch the digitization of the HASP files, that would be an appropriate time to reach out and do what Braden has just suggested, like, hey, if you have other material to add to the record for this property in the HASP files, please share it with us. That would be a great opportunity.
Yeah,
Why
you'd
don't
almost
we
have to
take
start.
some questions from the audience and make this a little more interactive for a few minutes here. I see there's one from Heather.
Sure. Heather is asking, is there a difference between listing a home and designating a home?
Yeah, yes, there is. So listing is what that gives the county is, I think it's 60 days anyways. If somebody all it does is say, if somebody wants to demolish a building, the council has a certain amount of time to designate the property to stop that demolition. That's all listing is. Now that's on the protection side. It does give council and other people interested an idea of the heritage that's in the county. I actually think listing is very important, not just to stop demolition if necessary, but because the county itself has the most heritage, like the greatest richness or depth concentration of heritage of any place in the rest of the province in terms of built heritage. And it also has the most records about it. And listing is one of those things that just lets staff and council know what we have. It's an inventory, basically. Designation is a formal protection of the heritage attributes under the Ontario Heritage Act. So yeah, that's the difference.
Fantastic. Liz, besides the archives and the information that you guys got from the Walmsley family, did you go anywhere else to conduct research?
Well, you can, there's various, you can Google and get to, the provincial government has a collection of aerial photographs.
Right, yes.
I don't know, you might have the URL and be able to share it with people eventually after the call, but it's really fun to go on that and take a look at aerial photographs of your property.
That's a great resource. And I should mention as well that we have many of the instruments listed on the land abstracts, but a lot of people are interested in the original land grant from the Crown. We don't have those in the archives, but Library and Archives Canada does have those records, so they are also available.
There's a lot of secondary material too. You know, over the decades, people have written family histories, books on various topics, and a lot of things are in those books. So they're a very good source. And in fact, there is a small Walmsley book, isn't there, Braden?
Yeah, it's in the bookshelf. And in the Apple. Yeah, so probably backwards in the computer, but Dr. Walmsley did a memoir, it's County Yarns and Tales. This, I think, is available at the library. It was published, and there's all sorts of, it's not just family, but there's all sorts of pictures of, you know, the town and the history and who did what, and little anecdotes about other families and stories and tales of things that happen here in the county, etc. So it's kind of a neat piece to go with that. And then
And
there's
we do have a lot of those reference materials in the archives to help you out, because I know a lot of those books, I believe they're out of print.
Yeah, they're out of print, and the
oh yes, we've got that one.
Yeah, but you can also go to
us proud Athels. You know, it has all sorts of great history about the whole area of Athol, and a lot of the buildings, and pictures of people in front of structures that may or may not exist as well, which is neat too. So.
Books & Co. on Picton Main Street has a shelf of out of print history books. Yeah.
Oh, that's good to know.
Mm-hmm.
So about how long did this whole process take? I think, was it 6 months beginning to start, or?
Yeah, I don't know if counted from like day one. I mean, a part of it was, you know, in our minds and thinking about it, and, you know, so what is that as part of the process? The actual process, like once we were moving things forward, was probably only 3 or 4 months, maybe 5 months by the time, you know, it went through council, and the month to publish, and, you know, all that stuff. It wasn't, you know, Liz, correct me if I'm wrong, but it wasn't a huge length of time.
No, it was fall to spring, but then it took a while to get your plaque, because it's all, you know, they're all these little steps that have to happen through committee. But
and the plaque is really pretty too. It's quite cool. Sit on the front of the house.
Liz, is that like kind of a normal time frame, or can it vary greatly between properties? Or
it's never any shorter, you know, because, you know, we only meet once a month, and there's the research aspect and writing it up, and we share draft. Well, I took a draft to committee, and then the committee had, you know, some changes, and then it has to come back to the next meeting, and so on. And it can take longer. Partly it's also, I would say, you know, if the owner is really keen about it, like, we'll move it as quickly as we can as well.
Yeah, it was smooth. It was a good process. It was really good.
What do you guys think was the most challenging part of the entire process? Or did it all go pretty smoothly, or?
It wasn't that challenging. I mean, yeah, we had to go get new insurance because we advised our insurance company that we're having our house historically designated. They're like, fantastic. We will not be renewing your insurance. And so we were like, oh, okay, well, what do we do now? So we, you know, there's some things you just kind of got to go through. But it wasn't, you know, there's nothing insurmountable by any means.
I've had other designations which were tricky. One just south of Milford, where I just could not pin down the name of the family who had the house built. I looked so hard, and it was so confusing. And I, you know, sometimes you can't get the answer that you're looking for.
That is very true.
Yeah, like I put quite a bit of work into that one, and I finally said, I can't solve it. And here's a tradition, like normally when designated, we'll call a house after the first person, like the person who had it built, and the owner who had it designated, as a gesture, like as a thank you and an acknowledgement that the owner has taken the trouble to protect their property. But I couldn't get the name for this one. So that was challenging in that case.
And sometimes, you're right, there's information you just can't find, and sometimes information you think would be readily available is not. We have a lot of people that come into the archives and they think that we can pinpoint exactly when their house was built, and we don't have that information. We can make guesses from the land abstracts because generally the price increases, but we're not going to be able to tell you your house was built in like 1890 exactly.
This house, despite the family and all the history, if you look at basically what everybody thinks it is, it's 1875. If you ask the family, they say 1890.
Okay.
There's an inscription written underneath in pencil that, so I think the date is 1892, and it's that the house was da-da-da. But that might have just been when they kind of built that cabinet and kind of finished things. And so you don't know, and the family they don't, you know, there is no exact document that says this day. So you know, it's always subject for some debate, but the style of the house is clearly 1875. But
Yeah, you can determine a lot by the architectural style,
Yeah.
luckily. So do you have any, what would your tips be for people who are interested in maybe starting this process?
Yeah, just do it. Reach out, talk to PHAC, reach out to them. And I think you shared a link, I think, with that, Molly, of the web address for PHAC, which is the contact, or certainly.
I can send that out to everyone, along with their email contact, which I believe is heritage@pec.on.ca, and my email as well if you're interested in the records.
Yeah, so that'd be the best way. So I would say just reach out to PHAC and let them know you're interested in starting the process. And one of the fine committee members, perhaps Liz, will be the one to come and check out your place and start a conversation.
And there's no commitment, right? Like all we're doing is, even in the process, finding out more and learning about the property and appreciating it.
So I know we had another question. It was, what are the differences between a historically significant home and a historically designated home?
I'll answer it, but I think a historically significant home is one that has a historic significance. The designation is purely the formal recognition of that significance via the the passing of council and the bylaw.
Correct.
Yeah, I've learned stuff.
Now, if someone's thinking about doing this, but they're not sure if their home is would make the cut, is it best just to contact you to see, or is there anything they should think about?
No, the first step is just contacting PHAC. And you know what? We love talking about old buildings and old properties. So it's not scary, and it's just interesting. So absolutely just reach out to PHAC.
And I think for people too, and the county has a few of these buildings, but not as many as perhaps other parts of the province. The house doesn't have to be 200 years old or 190 years old or whatever. If it was a really interesting piece, and again, Liz, correct me if I'm wrong, but if something was architecturally significant from 1958 by a mid-century architect that is sitting on a plot that we don't really know about, but someone's got it, that kind of thing, if a person was interested in historically protecting, could very well apply as well. So it doesn't have to be,
There could well be buildings that are being constructed right now, that if they have artistic merit, could be designated. And the Walmsley House and the property is spectacular, but I have to say, I have a soft spot for humble places as well. And sometimes it's the humble places that get overlooked. I will just mention a property that is designated that I'm just absolutely besotted with at the moment. And that's the Hutch and Rose Log House on the South Shore. And it's a property which has recently been purchased by the Nature Conservancy of Canada. And the family, they sought out designation. This was several years ago, for a little log house, it's a log house built of cedar logs harvested on the property. It is, it's not a cabin. It's actually quite sophisticated for a log structure, but we're so lucky to have this building. And the reason is it shows how people lived. It shows the way of life in the past. And so sometimes a humble house.
It has the most incredible detail of the brick chimney at the one end of the house that's held up by steel supports because they couldn't afford to put brick all the way to the floor and make a foundation under it. And it just shows how people did things back in that era and made it work. And it's a really neat detail. That's always one that caught my eye when I saw the material on the Hutch and Rose house.
And I always think how long it must have been to get to Picton, honestly, from down there.
Oh yeah, that would have been a long trip in. I mean, even when this house was built, back in the 1870s, I mean, it was an outing to get to Picton. It wasn't something you just did on a Tuesday morning to go in and grab some groceries. It was, saddle up the horses and get the wagons going, and it was a significant event to get into town that far.
And, you know, another interesting thing, although the Walmsley house is very little changed, and that's what's very precious about it, sometimes you can have a house that's very old, that's gone through many evolutions, many changes, and the changes themselves are significant and interesting. So the adaptations that somebody will have made to a structure. So just because let's say a building is not exactly the same as it was in 1875, it doesn't mean it's not interesting and
That's very true.
worthy of protection.
Well, I think it's really great to see how passionate you guys are. You as a homeowner and you as a member of PHAC, that, I mean, you really get a great sense that you guys really care about the property and what you do. And I think that's really nice to see.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It was a fun process, and we got to meet and know Liz quite well. And yeah, it's all part of the community, and I think preserving our heritage for future generations and kind of an opportunity to do that. So it's been really a great process.
So did anyone have any other questions for any of us? I had one more question. Braden, you were talking about how you would have to get changes made to the outside of the house approved by PHAC. What about, is that the same for changes inside of the house? Is it any change to the house, or?
So there's a couple of interior elements that are designated. So the staircase, which is a really cool old staircase, perhaps not up to modern code. If I was to say we're ripping the staircase out, then that would be an issue. But you know, if I wanted to change the cabinets in my kitchen, I can change the cabinets in the kitchen. If I wanted to, you know, redo the tile floor, which is, you know, 1980s tile floor, I can redo the tile floor. So there are aspects that, you know, would need consideration if a permit was required for those aspects. But you know, for this particular house, you know, I have a very free hand from an interior perspective, simply because that they're not actually listed elements of the house, and that varies from property to property. And Liz can certainly speak to that as well.
It's very rare to have interior details designated. One house in Picton in particular, we designated the plaster ceiling rows in the dining room, I remember. And often it is a staircase. That if you have to get a building permit, then it just kicks in a process, and it means that the permit application does come to PHAC for consideration. And if they're kitchen cabinets and it's not one of the attributes, there's no problem. But often, sometimes people will want to do something and it may have an impact. And it has often been the case that a kind of a creative discussion can ensue, and we get a better solution all around. So and we try to make it, we meet once a month. So there should be no delay for people in their work.
It sounds like you're really...
I might need a special permit permission soon. So I'll let you know.
Yeah, I understand.
It sounds like you're really willing to work with people on those kind of things, which I think is great and important for people to know. So.
And people should know that PHAC meetings are public meetings, and I mean, you can come and listen, even if you don't even have an item on the table. You can just come and listen to what goes on.
Well, guys, is there anything you think I've neglected to touch on that's important to know, or?
Thank you. This has been a fun process. I hope the audience found it of interest, and I hope we see some houses designated going forward.
Well, thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate that you were willing, you know, to take time out of your busy schedules and do this. And I think I've learned a lot. So I hope everyone else has. And I will make sure that everyone has the email to get in touch with PHAC. My email in case they're interested in the archives, as well as the online information about historical designations. And yeah, so if you have any questions that you didn't think of now, please feel free to follow up. So, all right, well, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your afternoon, or I guess it's almost evening now. So
bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.